Welcome to the Grappling Grappling Rewind Podcast.
Welcome to this week on the Grappling Rewind Podcast. On this week's show, we're going to talk about what is the greatest grappling match of all time. We're going to break down Kade Ruotolo versus Andrew Tackett. As always in the show, I'm your host, Maine, with co-host
Zach.
How you doing, Zach?
Pretty good.
We're doing good today, and basically it's a slow week. And we were talking last week with some of the Grappling Rewind team of like, okay, what do we want to talk about? What do we want to cover? We don't get these opportunities a ton on the show to like go back and have kind of topic episodes. We were talking about, okay, do we want to go through a bunch of prospects like the Ruotolo brothers and the Tackett brothers and Joseph Chen, or like
Prospects.
And then everyone on the team was like, yeah, man, those are no longer prospects. Those are he is the ADCC champion, multiple time trials winners. Like, yeah, not prospects. And I went, okay, very reasonable. And as we were sort of like constructing the show this week, we got to talking about this match internally, and we're like, oh yeah, this is a really great match. We're now about a month and a half out of this match now, and we all pretty much universally go, yeah, it's still the best match ever. And I think once we get further and further down the line, like that might change.
Might not.
But having just rewatched it to break it down again on the show, because we talked about it when it happened and how excited we were about it, but we thought we'd come back. I think these are two guys that kind of, in speaking about like, in quotes here, prospects, like they're both like 21.
Yeah, they're not prospects. They're just young enough that they're still at the beginning of their career.
Yes, very much like there's lots more grappling or MMA or that these two folks are gonna be doing, and I think it is a very interesting touchstone match that we can talk about now, break down again now, because there's some really interesting technique and some like countering, and as the match develops, because it's over 3 rounds in the CJI rules, you see the tactics and the strategy kind of develop for what both guys are bringing to the table. Yeah. This is also a rematch. These two met in a juvenile matchup a couple years prior that we didn't rewatch, because both people are developing at such a rate that it's like, yeah, though it may be interesting, I doubt either guy is really looking back to that match for information about what his opponent is going to bring to the table.
Yeah, technically a rematch, but I don't know if I count it.
Do we really count? It's like when guys meet at black belt. It's like, well, it's a rematch. It's like, yeah, at purple belt or like at juvenile. It's like, yeah, man, they're such different guys, unless a guy is not necessarily a head case, but certain guys that will matter with. But generally speaking, if you're more than like 5 years out from a rematch, or in these guys' cases like 2 years, it's not really going to matter.
It's 2 years, but it's also 2 years between, the 18, 19, 20, 21 year age range. And those are wildly developing.
ADCC World Championships at 77 kilos. Everything's different than that. So we thought we'd take today to basically do a recap and a looking back into what we still kind of internally consider the greatest grappling match ever. And it's funny, the CJI on the B Team YouTube also has it listed as the greatest grappling match ever. And before that, there's a bunch of matches. When we had during the pandemic, we did a bunch of shows where we kind of did stuff in similar nexus and vein to this. And we talked about like Usman Palhares and Gary Tonin, like how good of, and like in rewatch, that's a really exciting. That was for years. Even before we started the Grappling Rewind, the match that a lot of us would sort of point to, like, hey, you want to get into jiu-jitsu? Like, it can be good. Go back and watch these two guys. And I think before we get into that, so there's no news today. There's nothing else going on. This is what we're breaking into. We're going to do an old school kind of just one breakdown of all 3 of these rounds. We're going to talk about all the particulars with the rule set, with the grapplers, with sort of where it takes these guys. Because there's a lot to talk about. And it's a really great match.
Yeah, it's worth taking a show to go over, especially when we don't have a lot of other things going on in the world, the jiu-jitsu world right now. And just the fact, it's a month later, which is enough time for us to be over the excitement of being there live and watching this match live, and then just kind of feeling that atmosphere, and then thinking, maybe this is the greatest match ever because of the energy, but going back and rewatching it, taking our time outside of that environment, I think it's still probably the best jiu-jitsu match that we've ever seen.
An arena of all of us going, one more round, one more round, one more. And so last week, Randall and I talked about the podcast that Seth Belial did with the B Team guys for Simple Man, and them talking about internally, like, when that was happening. And Craig was like, let's do another round. Like, and Seth's like, no, we absolutely cannot we have rules. We absolutely cannot do another round. Like, yeah, we can totally do it. Like, no. But being there live and yelling for one more round, I think we watched it. You and me and my wife upstairs watched this match today to kind of like watch it, take some notes before we were going to cover it again on the show. And we were all kind of going, yeah, this is still really, like, we had this is a 15-minute match that probably took us almost an hour and a half to go through because it was like, okay.
Yeah. After independently doing the same separately.
Yeah. Okay. Slow it down. Okay. Bring it to half speed. Okay. Go back here. Look at his hand position. And so it was an hour and a half of us doing that. We hope to kind of recapture some of that because it's a wildly interesting match. Before we even get to the match breakdown, I want to start off with a discussion that's happened a lot, which is this is why CGI rules are good.
Yeah. We see that CGI. People are saying CGI is a great rule set, and I don't think it's a bad rule set. I also don't think that it's some big improvement over the rule sets that we've seen. Yeah. And people point to this match. I think what we're getting at, though, is that these two, what did you say? These two can be put in any rule set, and it's going to be the best match of all time when $1 million is on the line. Like this.
Not even, okay, I said you could put these guys in the back of a 7-Eleven parking lot for $20, and it's going to be one of the greatest matches of all time. Like, these guys, and we talked about it when we broke down a lot of Gary Tonon's earlier matches, is like, you put that guy in a match, he's going to have an exciting match. Like, that's what he wants to do. It's like Justin Gaethje early career. Like, that's what he wanted to do. And even both these guys, Andrew and Kade in the post-fight for this match, talked about, yeah, man, it takes two guys to have a match like this. Both guys have to be willing to go, have to be willing to, like, not play it tactically and slow.
We sort of saw the opposite of this in Cade's following match, which was 5 minutes long, which was not
25 minutes long.
25 minutes long. 5 rounds long, I meant. But 5 rounds long, and was not anywhere near the level of interest or excitement that the Kade Tackett match was because of style matchups. And I think, we can talk a little bit more about how the rules played into each of those matches and the contrast between the two. But I think the big thing is that we could take these two and put them into really any rule set, and it's going to be one of, if not the best match of all time.
You put these guys in a Street Fighter tournament, it's going to look like...
It might even be more interesting in a Street Fighter tournament, but...
But that's what I mean. Like, you put them in any rules that these two guys are going to be this level and this style of competitive, and it's interesting. I do think it is great we had it in the rules. So I think the pit wall played a little bit of a factor of, like, the ability to get guys down, and we have some technique. One of the things I want to point to at the beginning of this is so interesting because we are at the beginning of the third round. And we'll talk about the first 2 rounds here. These guys have kept a Zak has pages, like 3 or 4 pages of notes for a 15-minute match. We are 8 seconds into the third round, and we have Andrew aggressively shooting a blast double inside. Like, very few people are going to keep that level of pace 10 minutes into a match that has already had that level. It takes both guys. It's great that it happened in the rules. I think this happens independently in any rule set. So I think you have to take, like, greatest matches ever sometimes away from rule sets. Yeah. But again, credit where credit's due. They put it together. The matchmaking made it happen. These two put on an incredible performance. I just think it's a little cart before the horse to go, well, it's because the rules, like, put these guys in a naga. They're going to do this.
I would watch this match in EBI rules, and I do most of what I can to not watch EBI.
Yeah.
That rule set. So, yeah. All right, let's get into the match.
So let's get into it. Zak, so this is, for some context for this match, this was at the Craig Jones Invitational. This was the semifinals match. This is actually not the finals match of the under 70 kilogram bracket. For context, Andrew Tackett had won the ADCC trials. Him and his brother were 2 of the first athletes to leave for Craig Jones Invitational and kind of spurred on, oh, this is a real thing, this is money. Kade was the champion of ADCC at the 77 kilogram division, the division that Andrew won a trial spot for to come in. And Kade and his brother also went, yeah, I'm about the money, I'm going to come in. These 2 guys were 2 of the pretty cornered favorites almost to make it to the finals here. This was the top guy on your A side of your bracket and the top guy on the other side of your A side of the bracket. So they were going to meet in the semifinals, and this was kind of what everyone predicted to take it. The winner of this match was what a lot of people thought who was going to take the tournament. You had Levi Jones-Leary on the other side of the bracket. He was another big dark horse. Not dark horse, but, like, very heavily favored because he can play rule sets so well and has an incredibly difficult game to deal with. But this is a semifinals match. As a result, for Craig Jones Invitational, it's only 3 rounds. The finals matches are 5 rounds, but in 3 rounds, 15 minutes, these guys put on this high-quality match. So, Zak, where do you want to start in this match?
We go in order, right?
We start at the beginning.
Yeah. And the action in this match in particular really kicks up within seconds. I think my first timestamp here that we talk about is 4:38, which is the first takedown sequence.
Yeah.
And so Tackett shoots for an outside double, and we saw Tackett do this throughout the entire match. He's taking a lot of outside shots. They are relatively clean outside shots, but I think it's more just initiating action. A lot of times that's what he's doing to get... I think in many cases, I think he was less interested in getting the takedown, although he would obviously take it, and more interested in starting some sort of scramble action that he began to set the pace for, right? And so that's a thing that we talk a lot about is momentum and pacing, and you want to be the one on the offensive. And so I think a lot of his outside shots were mostly just to get things moving. So he takes this outside shot, and he immediately comes up from it and tries a go behind. And Kade does something that we see him do over and over and over and over again in this match is he grabs the whizzer.
In general,
in general,
Kade likes to play a counter whizzer game for a lot of guys because he is in this plays with attributes. He's lanky, he's long, he can make some interesting distance with the whizzer, and he's very willing to just throw you and like gets takedown, cool. I get to scramble from top. Don't get takedown, cool. I get a scramble from bottom. Like, he just doesn't really care, and that, again, plays into what we talk about for the dynamics of the matchup, but why it's so interesting, because Kade is so willing to go, cool, I'll just take what is usually seen as the inferior position, the overhook whizzer, to try to counter throw off of this shot takedown from Andrew, Andrew's a pretty good shot takedown wrestler as far as in jiu-jitsu. Like, look at him in trials, look at him in a bunch of tournaments. Like, he can pretty repeatedly and readily get most people at whatever level he wants to down if he is the one initiating the shot sequences.
So they play off this counter whizzer position for a while. There were a couple throw attempts from Kade, a couple times where they hit the mat, but Tackett's able to scramble back up. Kade's pretty much just going for the Uchimata a couple times over and over again, pressuring and setting him up.
He has some interesting foot positions, too, that he'll go to. You'll see him, like, fence the outside leg of Andrew on, like, a shock or a shock by to try to go, like, not even a Harigoshi, like the big throw across both legs, but he'll kind of pump his leg out to get him to base onto the same side leg so that he can get the distance to throw with the Uchimata, which is that center leg throw, or the whizzer kick, as a lot of, like, wrestler guys will call it.
My preferred name as well.
Uchimata.
The wizard kick.
The wizard kick?
Yeah, wizard. With a D. No. The wizard kick
that's in an hour and a half. We're recording this, by the way, right before the whole gang plays Dungeons and Dragons, and so we're going to literally have the whole podcast crew in the house in like an hour and a half. For pretend time, as we put it.
So what is interesting, the end result on this, though, is that Kade is kind of aggressively driving through this whizzer, and Tackett does something really interesting when they get close to the wall, and the wall of the pit wall plays in here, where I think what essentially looks like happens is that Tackett almost tries to spike Kade's face into the pit wall, which in like a perfectly legal way and a smart way, but Tackett kind of leans forward as Kade is driving and pushes Kade's face into the wall, and Kade has to release the whizzer to protect his head, I think, right? He's like kind of moving quickly towards the wall, and he has to release that whizzer, and when he releases the whizzer, Tackett is able to climb around the back and then takes Kade's back off of that.
It's a shock buy, and we see him use the shock buy. So, by the way, we have the match running. I think it's going to be absolutely impossible with how like frequent the sequences are, and like the timestamps on them for us to like do both. I think it might just be here for funsies.
Yeah, sure.
It is interesting. Like we saw Tackett use that throw by and the shuck by repeatedly because Kade likes to play such a heavy whizzer game, and I think in general we see Andrew really, really confident with the shuck by. It's kind of like in the way that we see Roberto Jimenez a lot of times, where he's like really comfortable. He locks his hands, and he's really comfortable with that motion to kind of get behind your shoulder that is typically going to protect with like the overhook, even underhook. Like he's just really comfortable making that shuck by at whatever distance you're playing to get the back. And I think we see a pretty solid back attempt from him in every round, and I think a couple rounds he actually is able to get something going and actually get the back off of it.
I think in most of them, though, that shuck through, the shuck by that Tackett's hitting is good, but in most cases it's not working. Kade is extremely good at holding that overhook, that whizzer.
Yeah.
In
He's
this particular
so long,
case,
too.
he shucks his face into the wall, I think, and then just to kind of protect his own head, Kade releases the whizzer.
What timestamp he wants?
It was. We just missed it. It's fine. You could have just hit play.
Oh, my bad. I've moved it forward minutes at a time.
That's all right. It's all right. But it was just an interesting sequence. I'm not sure if it was intentional or Tackett was just kind of at the edge of the mat and then hits this shuck by, and this is what happens. But he kind of shucks him into the wall in a way that makes it so that it allows him to end up taking the back, and then they sort of slide down the edge.
They slide down the pit wall in a funny way where it's like the takedown actually occurs high up on the wall, and then typically in like MMA or like another walled grappling sports, which really is MMA, there's a couple of them we've covered that have cage work. You'll fall kind of directly down. The pit wall, you kind of slide down, and it's a funny motion because you can kind of usually when you are falling off a flat surfaced wall, you kind of both just boom, you fall. There's really not a lot of positional change. With the slide down, you see a little bit of like jockeying for position while they're both kind of taking the 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds to slide fully down from where the takedown happens on the wall all the way down. I've been kind of critical publicly and privately of the pit wall. The more I watch it, the more I see it. Dude, I like it. That you just, yeah, man, there's no reset. My wife talks about it all the time. Like, there's no resets. You don't, the ref, she hates resets. Like, the ref doesn't have to reset them and stuff like this. Like, this would have been a takedown out of bounds or not a takedown. But with the pit wall, it was like, cool, they're now inbounds. They're now in an interesting position and they're working. And there was no weirdness at all because, like, the way that the ring is configured just allowed for the match and action to keep going. So this is one piece where I go, potentially, not to the rules, but the arena that they are fighting in here potentially really help this match for activity because there are no breaks. We have 3 rounds with 0 breaks, and with these guys, with the activity, with the pace, with the distance they cover, you would have had to have breaks and some sort of reset here and there if this match were to happen in almost any other rule set.
Yeah, and I think that's where CGI... that if anything about CGI made this match better than it might have been in other rule sets, which is kind of going against what we were saying earlier. It is the pit. Just the existence of the pit I do think made this a step up from what we would have seen in other organizations that don't have a pit, regardless of what the rules are, because that pace was able to stay higher. But it's not just that the pace is able to stay higher, but the athletes themselves don't have to worry as much about the area that they're in when it comes to takedowns. You can hit these outside shots and bully doubles and things like that, which we see a bunch of times in this match
over and over.
And you can afford to do those because, you know, if I keep the pace and I keep the momentum going as we run into the wall, I'm still going to be able to finish. It's not we're just going out. I'm not wasting a ton of energy getting this person from the center of the mat off the edge of the mat just to go back to the center of the mat. There's no frustration involved in this, like, repeat this thing happening over and over again. There's no playing the edge so that you don't get taken down. Like,
well, you can play the edge, but in this scenario, you saw like Kade do normally what you do, which is like turn, go to the outside, go towards the edge of the mat, but he hits a wall.
Yeah.
And then Tackett goes, cool, our gym has a wall. I'm used to this. I'm probably used to running guys into this sequence in the wall. And as a result, he's able to take the back fully with the body triangle as they slide down the wall and finish this takedown. And so like we're 10 minutes, 15 minutes from the show already, and I'm already like walking back. Like, well, the rule set, the arena and the rule set I think are different.
Yeah.
The more I see it, if things can afford to have this canvased pit wall, man, I'm kind of like Yama pit fighting might have had it figured out in the 90s or 2000s, whenever Yama went away. They might have had it figured it out, dude. Because it's still so much different than MMA, though. Because with the vertical wall, you can kind of lean into it. With the pit wall, you kind of end up like slipping and falling down, and it naturally puts you on the ground for grappling in a way that an MMA style or a straight up wall doesn't do.
And it also allows you to continue grappling in the corners, where, you know, I think corner play in MMA is huge because of punches, right?
It's great.
But in jiu-jitsu, like when we see the UFC's Fight Pass,
well, they don't do it in cage anymore.
What the early days of it when it was in the cage, that organization, you would see that the corner work actually kind of
submission underground.
Yeah, submission underground. You would
Chael's
see
organization.
Yeah. You would see kind of things stall almost a bit in the corners instead of like in the corners in MMA. It's exciting because you're getting punched in the face.
You can
in the corners
punch your way through a position.
Yeah, but in grappling rule sets for that organization, it just things kind of got stalled out there. You don't see that happen in the pit because there's enough mobility left that people can still escape position, people can still advance position, people can still throw submissions up against this wall.
It's easier to walk around it. It's not just a hard wall. You can like that 45-degree angle allows you to get your hips up. It makes it a lot more interesting than I even thought it would. And I want to walk back a lot of my criticism of like, infrastructure wise, it's probably annoying. And I think I am curious to see how many tournaments will adopt it, but man, it fixes a ton of problems that we bitched about for years on this show. And I want to take a step back and go, man, it fixes a ton of problems that I've bitched about for a decade in watching professional grappling.
Yeah, it does. It's a great change, and I think my favorite or what I think is the best change in the organization setup of the rules.
We're 1 minute into this match.
1 minute in. Let's keep going. All right, so Tackett's able to grab the back and pulls the body triangle as they slide down the edge of the wall. We're in body triangle for almost a minute and a half here, and this, ultimately is, I think, this position in this back take is why Tackett's mostly takes the first round.
Yeah, I think so. It's a dominant position. He does have a couple of good grips across the face and a little bit on the chin, but one thing I've seen a lot in the way that Tackett actually, that Kade defends this is something I've seen a ton in both MMA and jiu-jitsu really come to prominence is at the highest levels, no one's finishing a one-arm choke anymore.
Yeah.
And because everyone kind of figured out, I can eat the one-arm choke as long as I get and grab the opposite hand, not the set hand, but like the power hand, the anchor arm, and I can pull that off of my head. Like at the highest levels, if there's size parity and strength parity, you're just not going to finish me with the one arm unless you have the other arm trapped in some way. But if you're 2-on-1 or 2-on-2 here, you're not going to finish a one arm choke.
Which is kind of funny because this kind of goes back to the way that things were in the early days, right? I started jiu-jitsu in maybe 2004 or something like that, and when you learn how to defend a rear naked choke in 2004, you get the anchor arm and then you lock it underneath your armpit, which is not something we do exactly anymore. But then there was a period, so like that worked, and that was the defense from most of the beginning of my jiu-jitsu.
Pull the arm across.
But then there was a period kind of more recently where all of a sudden one arm chokes, people were like, no, you can just finish people even if they have the anchor arm down, and then that worked, and now it's kind of swinging back where it's not working again.
The head position fight and like the shoulder position fight, I think, has gotten weirdly better in a meta kind of way. But that's how we see Kade essentially escape out of this. Is he gets the anchor arm off, he pulls it off the head, and then he does a really interesting just like flare out.
Yeah, he turns his body so that he's sort of perpendicular to Tackett, and he does it in a way where it looks like he's just trying to get his back down to the mat, and he's able to do this because for some reason, so Tackett gets a really good bite on a choke with both arms in, right? But when he gets this really good bite on the choke, he also moves his anchor leg inside. And so I don't know if Kade was just putting a lot of pressure on the lock itself, and Tackett felt like in order to apply appropriate pressure, he had to move his anchor foot inside of Kade's hips. But that is really where things start to open up, because if that leg is still on the outside, then Tackett has more control over Kade's hips. And what ends up happening is because that anchor foot has moved to the inside of Kade's hips, now when Kade pulls Tackett's anchor arm down, he is able to drop his back to the mat, laying on top of that leg with Tackett's feet on the inside, essentially. And so because now Tackett's feet are on the inside rather than locked around the outside of his hips, there's more mobility that Kade has, and then Cade's able to, once he gets his shoulder blades flat on the mat, he's able to just sit up and turn in. And it's a very explosive sit-up that most people probably can't do, right? This is one of those things where just the athleticism is incredible.
Hey man, be
from
a
Kade,
super athlete at 21. Like,
turns out being a super athlete makes you good at a sport. But he's able to sort of like just sit up once he gets his back flat, but flattening his back created the space that allowed to happen. And it all sort of stems from Tackett's foot moving to the inside of the hips, which I think Tackett did intentionally when he got the good bite on the choke. It was kind of hard to tell, but he did move his legs.
I think to have the hip drive, because he wanted to lock into kind of have the hip drive to try to finish the choke, because he knew he would need like every bit of gas that he had, even early. We're two minutes into this match, 3 minutes into the match, going for it. One thing I think that was interesting that preceded this as well is we saw Kade using the pit wall to repeatedly, as Andrew was trying to, the body triangle leg was on the mat side, he kept trying to lift it up so the body triangle leg was on the top side, which is historically where you want it as the guy on someone's back.
Yeah.
You want that body triangle leg up in the air so that it can't get trapped on the mat. And Kade keeps using his outside foot to push off the wall and keep putting them back to have Andrew's body triangle leg on the bottom. He did it like 3 different times. And you're like, oh, look at that. That's not something that would have been able to happen in a flat matted area. And Kade kind of goes, I'm close enough. Push off, push off. And it was like little nuanced things that were like, oh, that was really interesting on a rewatch. I think I missed that the first time in the stadium. Definitely missed it. But even when I rewatched it, I think I missed it the second time I rewatched it. And it was just a little interesting. That's another interesting kind of wrinkle to the arena here.
Yeah. So Kade escapes, gets up on top, and then they end up standing again. It's a typical scramble situation. You see a lot of scrambles. I don't think we can go through all of them in great detail. Yeah. We have one note here that the mercy lock is annoying and should be illegal.
The mercy lock meaning like the interlaced finger grip. The thing that is legal in wrestling that we see a lot in jiu-jitsu. Yeah. It's illegal in wrestling because it's a stalling position. You can't really shoot off of it. You can't do anything except break the grip off. People in jiu-jitsu will kind of use it as a counter shot grip. They'll do some stuff with it, but generally speaking, there's not a lot you can do off of it. And even if you're shooting, you can't really shoot through it because they can spin your hand and do it. It's like, I don't like to ban stuff in jiu-jitsu because I like that you can do whatever you want. But that's one thing in particular that's like, okay. Like,
it's a stalling position. I see the argument in jiu-jitsu in that it is a grip that you can use to pull guard. And pulling guard is not an option in wrestling, so it is banned there because it's just straight stalling. In jiu-jitsu, it might not be straight stalling because there is offensive guard pulls from it, but how we see it used more often is stalling.
I've said it for years since we kind of had the lapel, a lot of the lengthy, long lapel stuff come in. I think you should have a mandatory requirement to be doing something with grips.
Just for the spectators, if nothing else. Yeah. It's a... Yeah.
I can't hold on to the lapel for 10 minutes because I got the grip. Like, no, man, you got to do something with it. You got to be progressing with it. So, tangent here.
Yeah.
Basically, more shuck backs, more shuck downs, and we see again the Orlando Sanchez mirror
Don't
lock.
Give him credit for that.
It's not. I mean,
it's the standing mirror lock.
The standing mirror lock
from Kade.
But he's the most recent occurrence of us seeing. Like Shinya Aoki did a variation of it back in the day, where I showed my wife today, and she was like, "That's gross."
Yeah. Well, so this is the conversation we had. Kade does it. It's traditionally looked at as sort of a cheap shot move, not necessarily because it's bad jiu-jitsu, but it's the kind of thing that you're usually not going to get a tap with unless you're doing it so quickly that the person doesn't have time to tap.
And you tear their shoulder or elbow. Essentially is usually what it is. Like, oh, cool. Like, he didn't tap because he tapped. He tapped after I broke it because I tore his shoulder in this move.
Which is, and that's frowned upon, especially in your, like, local bunch of dads getting away for the weekend kind of tournament. It's not something it's kind of frowned upon. And it's largely because you have to do it so quickly that things are going to get damaged. There's not a nice amount of time for someone to say, yeah, you got me. Here, Kade actually doesn't do it as fast as he could have. He definitely moves into it quickly, but he doesn't do it in a way where he's like obviously trying to do damage immediately. I think Kade's an aggressive jiu-jitsu player and is not doing things nicely.
That is a great way to put that. Is a nice way to put that. He's an aggressive player. Yes, he is, Zach.
But, in this case, when we saw it live, I was kind of like, ooh, that's kind of a shitty thing to do. But rewatching it, he does actually put it on in a way that is slow enough that if Tackett did want to tap or needed to tap, he could have.
Yeah. Tackett's not going to tap that.
Yeah, Tackett wasn't going to tap to it. But
you're in $1 million tournament, like, that torn shoulder, I'll deal with this.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think it was more of a respectful application of the technique than it often is. And so we see Kade do it twice, I think once again in the third round, and both times it's a little bit more, we'll call it polite than it has to be in other cases. So a little bit of credit to Kade. I mean, a lot of credit to Kade for all kinds of things, but in that in particular, there's some credit to him for like not just absolutely trying to rip Tackett's arm off entirely and applying the technique in a way that's more respectful.
This round kind of ends with a really nice, again, pretty much the same sequence we saw earlier at the beginning of the match was a counter throw Uchimata by Kade after Tackett is going for like a shot in or like an outside shot and like a shuck by. And Kade ends up on top for the last like 20, 30 seconds of the match, looking to pass, looking to do some stuff. Round ends. I want to talk about the scoring here because it's the end of the round.
Yep.
I love that CGI has open scoring. If you want to hear me kind of like talk more in depth about that, I think I did it last week or the week prior about how much I really like open scoring. I think how it's like respectful to the athletes and it's like it is better all around. I think all combat sports should have open scoring because you're 2 rounds into a fight and you're like, well, I hope I'm winning. You're like, well, why do the judges
knows.
Why do the judges keep that information secret? Because it's like it affects tactically how you should be approaching it. You have to play a guessing game in a combat sport.
Yeah.
That's super dumb. I like that CGI has open scoring. All combat sports should have open scoring if you have a round structure. In this one, we have universally 10-9 for Tackett.
Yeah.
So he is up 1 round by essentially 1 point in all the judges' scorecards. And these are scored pretty much exactly like they are on MMA because they talked about Seth Belial, who's the co-promoter with Craig Jones for this, talked about, people understand how MMA is scored in combat sports. We used it because we want to capture some of that audience, and it just makes sense. The athletes like open scoring because they're used to seeing the points on the board. The fans like it because they're used to understanding how MMA is scored with the rounds.
And maybe this is the appropriate time to talk about this. Where the downside of this has been, and it doesn't affect this match that much. And this is part of the reason that I think that we're saying, I don't know if CGI rules are really pushing action in the way that it seems like from this match alone. One of the issues that we saw happen in a lot of matches at CGI was that someone would win round one and 2. And then they know that they're winning as long as they don't lose a 10-8.
Or get subbed.
In round 3, so then they play extremely defensively, extremely boring.
You can give the round away. And
you're giving the round away. It's the right move.
Absolutely. Yep. Again, I never want to fault the athletes for a board.
No. It's $1 million on the line. You win.
The Kainan Duarte thing of him stalling out Craig Jones in the finals, getting a bunch of penalties in ADCC. He's like, hey man, this is my career. I need to win this match. It's important. Like, and everyone in the arena kind of went, yeah, I feel you. I would do the same thing. Yeah.
And I agree. I agree with that tactic.
Yes.
That's part of the reason that they don't have open scoring. I agree with the open scoring. My preference is the open scoring. But that's part of the reason they don't have open scoring in other places, because if you don't know if you're up 2 rounds, you gotta fucking fight. And here you know that you're up 2 rounds, so you can hide it. You can stall. And so in this match, we'll talk about it more. But in this match, it doesn't matter because they each win a round, right?
They each win the first. So we have Andrew winning the first one, Kade very clearly winning the second one, and then so it's cool. You go into the finals,
and they both got to fight, and so like it doesn't impact this match that much, but it was one of the sort of downsides of the rule set that we saw in other matches throughout the evening. And so I don't know if I love the MMA scoring, and we'll wait and talk after. I think after the 3rd round, we'll have a bit more of a conversation about confusion on where some of these scores were coming from. But we'll wait until it's relevant to this match. But there are some other, from a spectator perspective, a little weird oddities about the scoring and these matches.
Yeah. So we're now into round 2. We all know that Andrew is up, and these guys again come out at the same pace that they were going before, super aggressive in the stand-up, which again, what you like to see. But what I also like about these guys is that they don't. A lot of times you'll have a feeling people will use the first minute of a round to just kind of like waste time and waste like score. And IBJJF, we see it all the time. The first 2 minutes of the match, usually nothing's happening.
Sometimes the first 8.
Yeah, like a lot of times, like, why? It's a long match. I don't want to run my gas if I'd have to go the entire time. I don't want to be tired at the end. And so both guys kind of go, cool, I'll tactically just play this light and then or guys come out super aggressively, super fast and try to get it over with. But a lot of times we see it slow. These guys do not do that. We're a minute in, and we see a bunch of like hand fighting per position, and it's not the kind of bullshit hand fighting that we see in a lot of matches. Like both guys are looking for an opportunity and not looking. They're both doing the thing that I love, which is I am willing to take the counter if you give it to me, but I'm going to put enough forward offense into you that if you kind of like give me an opening, I will take my just straight up offense and deal with your counter. And it's a good interplay, and it's what I like to see in jiu-jitsu. And when Zach and I do commentary for matches, it's what we like to see for matches. Like, hey man, I want to see a guy that's willing to play both ends of the exchange, but also very much willing and trying to get his own offense off in the first place, because that is how you have good matches. And that's, generally speaking, when we coach, like how you win. You want to be the guy initiating and doing things. And both these guys very much take that to heart. We have some interesting throws. I'm not going to get too much into them with Kade. This is an interesting kind of style matchup between the two, is because Kade has good wrestling, and we'll see it later in the match. He has the good wrestling. Andrew, I think, has more almost traditional schooled wrestling in the way that he approaches the exchanges for like shots for both the double legs and the single legs. Kade is very willing in all of these to throw a bunch of like judo foot sweeps and trips and like variations of foot sweeps at range. And I think it's really funny that as the match goes on, he gets a little more, I think bold is the right way to put it, like being willing to like kick the outside leg or sweep the inside leg. And in the beginning of round 2, because there's a little more distance, because both guys know that the other is willing to shoot it and actually like, cool, I am willing to counter you now because we're both going to go here. You see Kade using more ranged tools to try to like sweep Andrew over and kick him over and trip him. And it's nice to see kind of the combination of both being willing to wrestle and willing to foot sweep a guy at range with like a legitimate foot sweep. And it's, you don't see it as much as I think I would like to see it.
Yeah. So then the first actual takedown that happens here is also really interesting and is, I think, largely due to the structure of the pit again.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is Kade. He doesn't use traditional grips very often, but in this very particular case, he has what, a classic wrestling steering wheel grip. It's a collar tie and elbow grip. Like this is, day one teaching people how to do stand up, one of your first grips that you go to. So he's got this steering wheel grip and he uses it like, they call it a steering wheel because you can kind of turn a person right or left. And so he grips up the steering wheel and he turns Tackett very, very sharply toward the pit wall, and Tackett has to climb up the wall a little bit. But while Tackett's climbing up the wall, you're climbing up, and which means that your hips are moving.
You're walking up it essentially,
and so that steering wheel grip turns into a takedown as soon as the head gets about on the same plane as the hips, which very rarely happens except in like weird snap down situations and throw-bys and stuff. But in this case, because Tackett has to climb up the wall, he's actually bringing his hips up towards his head while Kade is pulling his head down, and we hit that sort of tipping point where his hips and head are on the same plane, and then Tackett falls, right? Yeah. So he gets this takedown, which I don't think this sort of steering wheel situation happens in any other structure, because it's this very unique scenario where Tackett, in order to keep his body moving and not fall over, had to bring his hips up higher than they would have been able to be any other way. And then Kade gets this takedown off of it because of that.
In every other rule set or every other structure that these guys are competing in, which is such a weird way to think about this. This sequence happens where Kade steering wheels him over, Tackett walks to the outside, and then ends up in front of him.
Yeah.
And it's like maybe he snaps him down when he does it, and they get into a scramble, but with the grip...
you should take down off of it, or whatever.
Like, you're doing something else. You're in only this structure, I think, is actually resulting in a takedown. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
And what I love is the pit wall is getting the action to the mat, which is the thing that we really want to see. Like, takedowns are interesting and neat, but I want to see like a takedown around and then the mat work, or a couple takedowns around and the mat work.
I love a couple takedowns. What I don't love is
no
takedowns or 40 takedown attempts that are sprints off the mat, right? Which neither of those things are happening in the pit.
Or non-committal shots that are like, I'm pushing off and fencing at the head. Yeah, that's not this. But it was just interesting that we both all picked up that I don't think this technique works in this exact same way unless these two guys are in this pit, and Kade uses it and runs Andrew into the wall. It was a really interesting like initial takedown sequence about a minute into this round after these guys have been working for sequences over and over and over again. And then Kade immediately tries to counter this into a topside crucifix because Andrew turns up, and then he tries to throw Andrew over. Like, this is a 5-second sequence. Like, throughout the entire match, there are Zak, you have pages and pages and pages of, you have like 4 pages of notes for a 15-minute match because there are so many sequences like this where it's like, okay, 5 different things happened in a chain scenario, and none of it was just scrambly. It was all thoughtful and purposeful, both guys looking for both offense and then a good counter and then counter offense, which is so cool to have at this level.
Yeah.
So, sequence happens. It results in nothing, results in both standing, but it's nice to be able to rewatch these things and to go back and look, oh yeah, a lot happened there in 4 seconds, that watching it live, you're like, oh, that was a cool scramble, and then being able to see it up close and personal and with the camera angles, you're just seeing like the technique on display. Next thing that happens like 15 seconds later is Andrew shoots a really nice kind of inside single.
So throw up single is what a lot of people have called it before. You're essentially doing it where you have, I think he actually might have done it off of hand-to-hand grips, but you can do it from all kinds of different ways where Tackett pulls Kade's hands up and then shoots down underneath, so your own arms are sort of up in the air.
I know this from
he shoots
MMA,
into a single. It's very nice.
You do a jab and then their hands come up and you shoot the hips. That's how I learned this.
But Tackett hits a really nice single off of it, picks up the single, and is actually holding on to it, which is, that only happens a couple times in this match where he actually ends up in like a single position, and Kade immediately starts defending, and he does something Maine pointed out. He does what is essentially a scissor takedown. But Maine pointed out during our recent watch that
he's like inverting underneath. So he does a really, and it's something we see occasionally, but the camera angle is actually pretty good to catch what happens. He plants on the mat, which typically if you're doing a scissor takedown in the room, most rooms it's banned. You can't do it because there's just such a high instance of blue belts and other guys blowing each other's knees out.
Yes.
But so the way to do it much more safely is you plant on the mat, and Kade does it because he plants on the mat, and then he actually gets his hip way, way higher up for the scissor leg, the kind of Asami scissor leg takedown, than you normally would. You're not just behind the knee. He gets behind like the back of his thigh, and he does that because it allows him to invert inside. So typically in the scissor leg takedown, you're going to go parallel, like exactly like Edwin Najmi and Gary Tonin in ADCC 2019, or Anderson Silva and Rio Chonin. Yeah. Like, you see it where you throw the guy backwards, and then you heel hook, and that's the sequence. Kade does this in a way where he gets up, because his leg is so high, he can invert underneath and come out to the backside of 50-50, and you end up in a really interesting backside 50-50 heel hook that, generally speaking, very few people are able to defend. But Andrew Tackett's like, oh, this is a neat sequence you have put me into. I'm going to begin to running man out. The thing that I love that Andrew Tackett does in this sequence is I rewatched it a couple of times.
Well, but before we, I know what you're going to say. So before we get into that, I need to point out that I don't think on this initial torque that Kade has that there's anything that Andrew has that's actually defending. Like, we were like, oh, maybe his knee's out loose a little bit. No, that knee's deep in there. This is an extremely deep heel hook, and I think Tackett was just like, yeah, this is something that he didn't look like he needed to tap to it, but technically speaking, this heel hook was finished. And Tackett was just like, no, I'm not going to tap to that.
He knew he could slip the foot. It was one of those things, like, you look at the pic, we have a freeze frame. Unfortunately, we have a freeze frame on the other side of it, so you can't see the knee line of it. But you look at it, and you're like, yeah, this is how I would have a guy do this sequence and finish everyone in a tournament at any level. Tackett knows, he's like, oh, cool, I can build a bridge, I can get up, I can get to the running man, and I can do that before Kade is able to break my knee in half.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, like, really high-level gambles that you're like, man, I am happy that guys like you exist that have that level of technique. Kade Ruotolo is ripping my leg apart in this sequence.
I'm not walking for days already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not like a Langacker versus Taza crank. It's not that deep, but it is like, it is a very small little window that Andrew capitalizes on, and this is where you start to see the leg lock defense of Tackett come into play, where a lot of guys, especially at lower levels, and like even like in lower pro level, they will defend this backside heel hook. Andrew does exactly what you should do. You come to 50-50, so you end up on backside 50-50, which is a really hard position to defend out unless you can just pulling running man out. He ends up back into frontside 50-50, which is just 50-50, and then he starts initiating the roll to beat the direction that Kade is trying to rip the heel in the heel hook. But he does something that is neat in that most guys at again, medium pro level will just try to beat them in the roll because there's a pit wall and because Andrew is good. Eventually, you're going to run out of space. And a lot of guys will use that running out of space to get a reset, to get a better position, or to get a stand-up. Andrew makes a turn, pushes the legs, gets up, rolls through again, gets up, pushes the legs, and like 3 separate times as he's rolling, he is both rolling to beat the heel, then he is addressing the knee line positioning, rolling again to beat the heel, addressing, and he's getting a little further out every time because Kade is hooked onto the heel hook and going for the finish. It's really hard to kind of drag the knee back into the position you need to finish, and Andrew does a good job of just like going, cool, I'm in front of you here, but I'm not just going to rely on the roll, because typically if you do that, if the guy is as good as Kade Ruotolo, he's eventually just going to chest down and hip down and beat you and rip your leg off. Or he's going to thread his legs through and stop you from rolling. But because Andrew is both rolling and pushing the legs and then rolling and pushing the legs, rolling and pushing the legs, he's able to free his knee line. And it's just a really good display of just how high level both these guys are, where you see this kind of combination of like up, pushing the leg, coming up, pushing the leg, coming up in combination as they run into the wall. And then basically the sequence ends up as a dead sequence because Andrew passes over the legs. They come up and they both sort of end up teching out of the position after Kade essentially almost gets bear trapped by Andrew. I think this is the sequence where that happens.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, Kade definitely scores in the judges' eyes here for this almost sub.
Yeah,
and I think he ends up winning this match for other things, but this was a close, a realistic sub attempt that Tackett really did have to clearly defend and spent quite a bit of time defending. So
yeah, and by quite a bit of time, probably like 10 seconds.
20, 30?
Maybe. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Total
for the
time
entire
from
sequence, yeah.
The entry and the first attempt, yeah.
The next sequence I think that really wins Kade the round here is literally the next exact sequence is Andrew, again, goes to that body lock for standing. They get back to standing, goes for the shuck by, and Kade counters him with an Uchimata and takes him all the way to the mat after Andrew tries to jump the back on Kade. And then this is sort of an interesting sequence because I think if you don't have the length of arm that Kade Ruotolo has, you're not going to be able to do this. Andrew does exactly what he should do. You don't get the back take on the jump for the shuck by. You end up in bottom half guard, and so you have a person that's on top of you trying to break you down and trying to start to pass. He keeps the body lock in half guard, and he keeps his head up enough where Kade can't easily snake his arm through for the anaconda. I can't tell if it's this round or next round. He ends up in the anaconda.
It is next round.
Next round. We know the Ruotolo brothers have an amazing Darce game. It's one of the best in the world. And Kade starts snaking this arm through to go for the Darce.
But what he does that's really interesting here too is he postures himself up.
Andrew does.
Kade does.
Okay, yeah.
Kade postures himself up sort of on one knee, but he does it in a way where that extends Tackett's arms out so much that that body lock is no longer an advantage to Tackett, and he's starting to put himself at risk. So Tackett has to release, but it was also pretty clear that Kade was sitting up like that for exactly that reason. And as soon as Tackett releases his hands, Cade's arm starts snaking in for the Darce. And so I think the sitting up was the important piece there because he can't get that body lock free. And you're not going to finish the Darce with the body lock around.
Yeah. No.
And so that he just sits up, he drives his hips in almost like he's sitting up on a like a knee ride position or a knee on belly kind of position. He sits into there, but kneeling on the leg. And then he's able to sneak the Darce in. Andrew Tackett's defense on this Darce is magnanimous, right?
We had a freeze frame of this, and you can see Tackett's face just like red and turn. It's like that is astonishingly tight. Yeah. Like it is like he's not going out, but you can tell that he is doing everything that he can to fence and get his arm and shoulder position in place so that Kade doesn't just take his. Because we've seen Kade, our Darce, many a top level grappler.
Yeah. And Tackett does a couple things that keep him from going out and from needing to tap to this position. One is he does a nice job when he's face down planting the inside arm on the mat to create a little bit of space in his neck so that he can get some blood flow there. He does a really nice job collecting his own leg for a minute. He like reaches down in the classic like telephone arm.
That brings your arm away from your own arm away from your neck. That is one of the things that you need to Darce choke with like any sort of head and arm choke. Your arm is doing half of the choking, so he gets his own arm down. And he does a bunch of these little things in series in order to get out of this choke.
And to stop him from passing out, I think. So he does a lot of nice, really good defenses and squirms around enough that, eventually Kade has the head and arm or the Darce in a position where you can look at Tackett's face and think, he's done. Like, this guy's cooked. He no longer has any options. But right when you see that happen, Tackett is also able to turn his back flat to the mat, which then releases a ton of pressure from the Darce and forces Kade to switch to the north-south choke, which is also in super tight at this point.
Yeah.
But it was an incredible display of being able to like use small adjustments to keep yourself from getting choked out, or to keep himself from getting choked out until he's able to get his back flat to the mat where the Darce is kind of released more or less. He ends up in this north-south, but then also Tackett does a really great job using his outside arm to snake in underneath Cade's face, which is one of the few ways that you can really defend this north-south choke pretty well. And Cade's eventually forced to release the north-south position. It was just, it's worth going and watching this in slow-mo because all of it's not one trick. It's not one defense that Tackett uses here. He uses 3 or 4 different methods for keeping blood flow to his face happening during the Darce and during the North-South choke, and none of them are incredibly effective on their own, but the fact that he's stringing them together and forcing Kade to adjust the way that he's applying the Darce over and over again to deal with these small adjustments in keeping the defense up is really impressive and worth noting.
At the high level with a guy like Cade's Darce is probably one of the best things he has. Really good choke and Darce. And so it's one of the techniques where usually if you're in a guy's best submission, you're not just going to wait him out and you're not just going to outflex him to get out of it. Like other submissions, maybe you can do that too. With the guy's best thing at this level, you're just not going to do it. You have to throw a bunch of combination defense into it. It is really interesting to see kind of an up close view of exactly where he's moving his hands. And it's if you are interested in kind of the sport that we do, it's a sequence that you should definitely go back and watch because it's just super neat.
Yeah.
So he goes through. Kade goes to the north-south position, goes back, and Andrew. The north-south is much, much harder to finish at this weight than in a lot of the other weight classes because you can just get your hands in, the shoulders, the lats aren't as big to cut off, and so you can, generally speaking, if you're really tenacious about it, if there's size parity, you can sort of push off. And that's sort of what Andrew does with some other technique there to get back into the guard. But I think these two sequences, the heel hook and specifically this Darce sequence, are very clearly what wins Kade this round because universally he's put up more offense and he's had he's had one good attempt on the heel hook, and he had one very, very close submission attempt in this Darce here.
Yeah.
And so more interesting stuff happens. Sorry.
Yeah, well, and Tackett does something nice here that I have to point out because it's my favorite nonsense in the world. He starts going for K-guard, starts entering into K-guard, and eventually Kade sort of flips his hip over and starts escaping the K-guard. Tackett transitions to the calf crusher, which is like my favorite thing. It's
super nifty.
It's my roll in the dice move. It's the thing that I like to do. It's not effective, but I like to do it, and I like seeing it at high levels every once in a while. Now it's been popping in every here and there, and so Tackett goes for the calf crusher here. And what I wanted to point out on this is that it's really nice, and he does, he makes a very good effort at it, but I think the reason that it wasn't effective here is that he ended up having to clasp his arms around Cade's hips rather than
really
through
around the thighs
leg.
almost.
Yeah, he's like at the thighs. And what you want for this is to be able to get wrapped around one leg. You're hugging one leg rather than at the hips. You just don't have as much torque. But he did have a pretty good bite on it, and I would call this a realistic submission attempt.
It's just so fleeting and quick. It's really like Kade starts defending the sequence immediately. The leg never starts to get clamped all the way. Like it's one of those. It is a position he has to defend. It is not yet like a submission threat, but it is going that direction. And I think the reason why Kade kind of turns this back over is in defending this, it's never super tight, but it starts to get there. Kade immediately goes for like what I would call a weak toe hold.
Yeah.
But it forces Andrew's legs to open up, and it's like, okay, cool. You have a weak submission, another weak submission, and you have a disengagement. When we do scoring, and when kind of Zach and all internally we talk about scoring for these things, like that's a neutral sequence. It's like you had a great attempt, you had a good attempt, you had a good like submission attempt, countered with a good submission attempt. Unless you're looking at initiation criteria, you're looking at submission criteria, it's the same thing. And so you have a couple of really good singular offensive points by Kade throughout the round, and then this even sequence. It's like, okay, you clearly give Kade the round with like 25 seconds left. They kind of come up. Kade ends up in top position trying to pass, and that's the round.
That sequence, though, is the reason that if I'm scoring this as a judge, I'm probably going 10-9 for Kade here rather than 10-8 for Kade. And without that last throw of an attempt, I would be a firm 10-8, and this sort of puts it on the bubble. And I think the judges in this case we're in the same boat. There was one 10-8 and two
Prehevich does a 10-8 for Kade in this one,
which is justifiable.
Yeah, and it's one of those, we watched this live, we watched this a couple of times, and I went, I can see it. Would I give it a 10-8? Maybe. Like on my end, from my understanding of scoring criteria, it's like I would maybe give it a 10-8 because you have a couple really deep sub attempts to no sub offense. It's like you almost finished the guy. In grappling sports, a lot of times that is merit and worthy of a 10-8. But again, 10-9 I think is also a very acceptable round, but that's why. So Judge Chris and Zak Maslany give it a 10-9. Miha Previch gives it a 10-8.
Yep.
And so we move on to the third round. So this is interesting because now both athletes know, I've lost my notes here. Both athletes know that they're up one round, but Kade technically on the judges' scorecard for Miha Previch is up one additional point in this. So not really going to matter because this one's done like MMA judging, not aggregate judging. Like Finishers does it in aggregate judging.
Yep.
I actually like that better where you combine all of the scores together and it's like it's a total point value.
Yeah.
But where this is done like MMA, so it's you have to win on on judges' scorecards. So Miha is essentially even now or is up 1 point on Kade's card as we move into the third round. Talked about it earlier. I'm going to talk about it again. The pacing of this match, again, you put these guys in any scenario, they're going to do this. 8 seconds in, we've had 10 minutes of pretty phenomenal action. 8 seconds in, we have Andrew shooting a good, strong, like kind of a blast double. Zach, what do you call that? Outside double? Yeah, I don't ever wrestle. So.
He's far enough away that it's an outside shot, and he's clearly just going for the double leg. He switches down. Tackett does switch down to the single, and Kade does a nice job defending the single, bringing his foot to the outside of Tackett's hip. And then Kade tries to do that roll-through defense, and Tackett sticks to the back, ends up on top through that. Really nice takedown exchange.
Yeah.
Tackett ends up in Kade's guard. It was a really clean scenario. And on the books, I think Tackett starts up because of this really, really nice takedown here.
Again, takedowns are hard to like score for, like, but they are initiation, and CGI does use sort of some of the ADCC initiation rules from what they say.
Who knows what they're doing? We'll talk about that.
Their scoring criteria is a little, it is hard to
questionable, hard to follow.
Yeah, hard to follow. But it's new rules, and that's always sort of the case with new rules. Let's see. So yeah, moving to the guard. And
so Tackett starts to try to outside pass, and Kade bellies down, and this might be the only, like, not that I'm being picky and saying that there's mistakes being made here, but the closest thing to a mistake that Kade makes maybe in this entire match happens here, where he bellies down and he techs up from this belly down, but he turns away a bit more than I think would be ideal, right? I think a lot of times when you're teching up in this particular kind of case, it would probably be better.
He's trying to stand up out of the guard from essentially like not quite a dogfight position, but he's trying to tech up out of the guard.
He's trying to, he's essentially teching up out of the guard. And, I think in most cases, the preference would be to keep your shoulders facing the person a little bit and maybe give them the single and then defend from the single. And instead here, Kade turns all the way away and starts trying to climb up and does move to his feet, but he essentially just gives up his back from standing from here. And Tackett takes advantage of that by jumping on him. And then Kade does some of the most nonsense thing that we see possibly in the entire match. But Tackett has climbed up onto Kade. He has his arms over Kade's shoulders, and they're standing. Tackett slips a little bit, right? His arms loosen just enough, and so the timing on this is impeccable. And as he slips a little bit, Kade drops his head forward, almost diving, stays on his feet, but almost dives his upper body
almost
forward.
At a 90, probably a 75-degree angle from his hips, like almost bent over completely.
Yep. And then reaches his arms behind him and reverse bench presses both arms, reverse bench presses Tackett off of him. So he leans forward to make it so that Tackett can't reach his neck anymore. And in doing that, Tackett doesn't have anything to hold on to, and then he does this weird reverse bench press thing that just the strength alone on this has to be incredible because Tackett's legs are still pretty tightly clamped around him at the time, and he essentially just pushes the backpack off.
And so the sequence we're talking about is at 2:23. I'm dyslexic.
3:23.
3:23 into round 3. 15 minutes and 14 seconds into the video on the B Team YouTube channel for this match is the freeze frame we're talking about. I'm just like, you look and you're like, who gets out of the back that way?
Who does this?
And it works amazing. And we do see it used occasionally, but it was just like the timing to have it work as well as it did is uncommon to say the least.
And so then Tackett slips down Kade, but still has his legs crossed around Cade's legs when they're standing, and then Kade just does like a little spinny flop and ends up on top, and then they scramble up. Like, it is a wild sequence to not get to, and like if we're scoring this like whatever ADCC style, there's no score for the back take here. Like, he's timed it up well.
You get an advantage in some rule sets, but
it's not
there's
scored.
not enough control because Kade just addresses it so quickly and almost turns into the top position, which is the funniest thing. Like, he flops and kind of not log jammer, like log rolls over and almost flat passes to top position here. Yeah. They both stand up and end back on the feet. This is where, again, Kade pretty much immediately goes for that standing mirror lock again. Tackett, again, deals with it, kind of rides the position up, lifts the shoulder up, and then comes back down into, like, hand fighting. Then immediately, we're like 10 seconds later, goes for another pretty deep shot, defended by Ruotolo. And then there's like a brief, like 2 or 3 second break in action, and Kade shoots in through and runs what you called like a bully double.
It's you just tackle the person with your forehead in their chest. This is a Jordan Burroughs classic situation. It's
blast double, kind of, but it's like more so just running them down than pulling their legs through.
Yeah, it is a viable technique. It's usually something you see done in the beginning of a match, but when you have the cardio that these guys do, Kade is able to do it.
It's at the 2:30 mark of round 3.
So
that means
12
we're
minutes
12 and a
seconds,
half minutes into the match, and Kade is doing it after the initial 2 sequences and defending a shot to then essentially not even counter shoot, but come back and then from standing hit this. This is stuff that we're talking about, why this is like, oh, this is one of the greatest matches of all time. In any rule set, this is going to occur. The pit walls aren't in play here. He does this in open space off of a standing opponent, like, who also has good cardio to run with him. Uncommon technique and like willingness to engage technique and like just run gas at a problem this deep into a match.
Yeah, it was an impressive takedown this late in the game. And so then we're playing guard for a little bit here. Tackett is on the bottom in guard. Cade's on top trying to pass. Cade's really aggressive with the passing.
So I think we're even now.
At this stage, we're even, or maybe Tackett's up. Tackett might be up a little bit, depending on how you view that sort of almost back take situation. Tackett had a really good takedown, a very clean takedown right at the beginning. Tackett had an almost back take.
Impressive takedown, but it's like, was it more active? It's like,
I don't know. I think it was less impressive, honestly. It's more athletic, but probably less technical. And so, like, whatever. That's splitting hairs. We have 2 good takedowns and an almost back take from Tackett. So, like, in my eyes,
Andrew up maybe a little bit here.
Yeah, Andrew's up a scotch. But we have 2 minutes, 20 seconds left on the clock. Tackett could theoretically just ride out playing guard here for the rest of the round and maybe pull off the victory.
Yeah, depending on how we're scoring it. Again, we're in a new rule set. Both these athletes don't really quite know exactly how. We see again in Cade's final match, Andre Galvao kind of like changes the tactics of how they approach it in order to kind of have Kade be able to win for how the judges are scoring it. But you could see it was stuff and decisions that these guys made on the fly throughout this tournament of, okay, this is how the judges are seeing it for these kind of rounds. Cool. This is how athletes that were good enough to be able to make adjustments in rounds and in matches like Kade Ruotolo were able to sort of play towards the judges and able to take wins that way.
So ultimately, Tackett has no idea who's winning this. I probably have him up. We get to about a minute left in the third round, and Tackett... Cade stands and is looking to maybe do some standing passing, but also creates just enough distance that Tackett sits up almost to turtle.
He
like
almost
he was trying
goes to the K guard.
Up.
He almost looks like he's either going to turtle, wrestle up, or K guard. I can't quite tell from the sequence that he does as Ruotolo tries to get around him. Like, it kind of looks like he's sort of trying to loop the leg and come under, but
at first, and then like just after the 1 minute mark, Tackett leans up. We're watching. He sits up like he's going to try to wrestle up, reaches for a leg. Legs are way too far away. Cade sprawls, sets in a pretty fucking deep darce, and then we have a minute.
Anaconda.
Or sorry,
Anaconda. We keep messing up.
Yeah, I keep messing up. He sets in an anaconda.
All of my notes say darce, and then at the end of my notes, like, oh, it's actually an anaconda because the hand's the other side.
So he sets in an anaconda, and he's up against the pit wall. Tackett does a nice job. It's probably the right move. He collects Cade's legs and scoops him down onto the flat mat. But that doesn't get him out of the anaconda. It just kind of releases the pressure enough that I don't think he's going to have to tap to it.
By the way, most people that will.
Yeah,
when you get doubled out of and dragged on a wall when you have an anaconda and you're unable to get your legs around the person, most people that will pop their hands off enough to get your head out. With Kade Ruotolo, one of the best arm-in chokers in the world, doesn't work like that. But I think Andrew knows that. He's like, cool, I've got him on the mat. I'm now not standing in this position where he can jump on top of me. I'm now in a better position to more effectively defend this for mat wrestling and on the mat.
Agreed. So it's a smart tactical move from Tackett. It's the right strategic move. Kade just holds onto that anaconda like crazy. He can't roll through to finish it like you would on a fully flat mat, though.
I just missed that, actually. I just saw him doing that.
Yeah.
You see him trying to arch back, but because there's a slanted wall behind him, he can't get his back flat to the mat to actually roll Andrew over. And you see him actually change the angle from being on the slope over. Is that in your notes?
Yeah.
It's not in my notes. I missed it.
And then Tackett climbs up the wall and tries to flip over. He actually does loosen things, the anaconda. Kade has to give that up, but then he switches to an arm and guillotine. We got an arm and guillotine for about 5 seconds. There's 10 seconds left in the match when Tackett gets out or so, and that's it, right? So we end up with a situation where with 1 minute left, Tackett might have been up just a scotch, I think, and then we get a really solid submission attack from Kade. And then he throws a gogoplata just at the end for funsies.
With the last second left, Cade's like, I'm going to go for a gogoplata too, and like has a pretty decent gogoplata in before Shaolin kind of stops it, and that's the match. But I think in rewatching the arena, we were all like, ooh, that was really close. Even rewatching now, it's like, that was very close. I think very clearly Kade wins this round on that last solid submission attempt for almost a minute.
Yeah.
Like he has a minute of very strong submission, or like 45 seconds of very strong submission offense on Andrew, where Andrew is only defending.
Agreed.
Either positionally or the choke or the neck. Like he is only defending. A 20% of your round is that. In a very close round up to that point, I think it is very clearly Kade Ruotolo's round. He does end up taking this. We go to decision. This is when all of us were screaming, one more round, one more round. And they almost did it, which I think is really funny.
So the final scoring on this, though, is something that we need to talk about a bit.
Yeah, the scoring is weird.
The scoring is 29-27 for Kade, 29-27 for Tackett, and then 29-28 for Kade. The 29-27 for Tackett is an absolute mystery to me.
Yeah, that's what Zak Maslany gave it, which is the guy that runs finishers. I mean, I know Zak, like I've talked to Zak for years and years. I honestly probably want to I want to just talk to him and figure out exactly like what he was seeing. Again, it's a new rule set, and so there's a lot of gray. It's not even a lot of gray. There's a lot of like just unknown. I think gray is like, oh, it could go either way. Unknown in this tournament is the better way to put this, because we've done less than 20 of these matches ever. Like you have a lot of stuff,
and it's not really been communicated to the general public what the scoring criteria that the judges have are, if they're just allowing the judges to sort of have scoring criteria that is loose and there is based on what their judgment of the sport is. You know, there is a general gist or vibe that we've gotten from them, but there's been no clearly laid out scoring rubric for any of these matches, and so it's very unclear how anything should be scored. Like maybe we're overestimating. You know, we did a lot of fight to win scoring, our commentary and a lot of fight to win talks on the show, and there it's such a submission heavy thing, and when we're talking about judges scoring a match like this, we're probably biasing ourselves towards the submissions because that's what we know fight to win is, and like we don't know
748 ADCC matches as a primary judge of like, okay, cool, like I've done a lot of ADCC matches where it's like they have a very strong criteria that I had to like train the secondaries and train the referees like that. So pulling this into the CGI is like, how biased are we? How am I looking at this from the perspective of ADCC or Fight to Win or like IBJJF?
Yep.
Or am I looking at as CJI, which is its own thing under its own rules?
But we don't know what those are, so it's hard for us as people that are talking about these matches and watching these matches and being excited about these matches to really understand what's happening, because there's no clear rubric from CJI on how they're scoring things, which maybe is intentional, but it makes for very confusing spectation.
For this on a split, like I think coming back to the score, Miha's score of 29-27 Kade makes sense.
It was 10-9 Tackett for round one from him, 10-8 Kade for round two, and then 10-9 Kade for round 3. That makes perfect sense. We get that. We can agree. We talked about why the 10-8 for round 2 would have gone to Kade.
I think Chris's score, I don't have Chris's last name here, but like of the 29-28, it's like, cool, you give 2 10-9s to Kade, round 1 and round 3, or sorry, round 2 and round 3, and then you give 1 to Tackett, round 1. Zak Maslany's score is the odd one where it's 29-27 to Tackett. It really comes down to this third round.
And we know for him, it was 10-9 Tackett round 1, 10-9 Kade round 2.
Right.
Which means that he had to give Tackett a 10-8 round for round 3.
Yeah.
Which I don't understand how that happened.
Actually, I think 29-20.
29-27 for Tackett is what he scored it. So it has to be a 10-8 round for Tackett in round 3, which is very confusing. Like I can think of ways that it's a 10-9 for Tackett.
I really can't in the third round. Having rewatched
I would disagree with it, but I could see arguments for it, and I could see the way that the rules being structured and the scoring being structured, that like, okay, maybe we're not calling submission attempts as valuable as clean takedown and other things, other positioning things. Like maybe that's how it's being done, and maybe you look at that almost back take and call it a score, right?
Yeah, if you're valuing positional dominance greater and like almost taking positional work, like that's what Tackett does more of in this round. Like that could have been the criteria that Zak's seeing it by.
And if you're scoring
this, he was doing it for.
If you're scoring this as an IBJJF round, right? And let's say that in your eyes you counted the back take. We've now got 2 takedowns and a back take. Tackett wins this match, right? There's no submission. It's an almost submission. Tackett wins it, right? If we're biased because we watch so much Fight to Win and we're biased towards submissions because we think that that's how things are happening, but it's not, then maybe Kade doesn't win this match on those really strong submission attempts at the end of the round.
Or if you're doing it by initiation, if you think Andrew initiated a lot of those sequences more, it's like, so there's a lot of subjectivity here, but it is interesting to talk about.
But the 10-8 is hard to figure out.
Yes,
that one's confusing. I could very well see a 10-9, but the 10-8 is I can't figure it out.
If Tackett's not getting a 10-9, sorry, if Kade is not getting a 10-9 in that second round, it's an 8 from anyone else other than Miha. It's hard to look at this round and go 10-8 for Andrew. So it's interesting. Regardless, I think the correct guy wins here for our understanding of the criteria, but it's close, and it was, I think, still one of the greatest matches ever. You had 2 young athletes who we're going to see a lot more of, being willing to put it all on the line, being able to keep pace and activity for 15 minutes. I think this is what rule sets should strive to create in their match activity. Yeah. I think the problem with a lot of the rule sets is there is not as much incentive as is needed to force activity. And it's like you can back up too much. You need to be shooting. You need to be progressing the match.
And I think the problem is I think what you said it right. There's not enough incentive to do things. It's not enough incentive for action. And what the response to that in a lot of these cases is de-incentivizing stalling. And so I think that's a lot less effective of a way to make an entertaining sport. Punishing people for not doing things is less interesting than rewarding them for doing things. And so like you see, not that I think it's the perfect example of a rule set, but Abu Dhabi, not ADCC, AJP.
I literally, weirdly enough, Rob just texted me about AJP.
I really like up. They have a very interesting rule set where if it's tied, the last person to score is winning.
I don't know if that rule's still in there, but for years they had it.
It was. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure if it's up to date or not.
But
the rule, for a while, that made a lot of sense to me because then you don't get people that are stalling out and
and even
someone's always winning.
You scored last, and so at the end, people make a mad dash to score, and
someone is always trying to score.
Yes, and it does can do the other thing where the other guy's incentivized to stall and not let a score happen. He's not incentivized to do anything. Yeah. So again, all rule sets have their issues, and it's just with any sport. Look at any NBA, NFL, MLB. They update their rules all the time because the thing happens, you're like, okay, we gotta deal with that. And those rule books are, if you've ever looked at a real professional sport rule book,
it's fucking nuts.
They're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, and they have sections and bylaws. There's some somewhere on YouTube. There's a guy that breaks down NHL and baseball, and it's a rules thing and he goes into like specifics of this rule is here, is in this subsection here, and like, and
of course you would know this.
It's why I forget what it was, but it's wildly entertaining to watch him like in just the depth of the depth of how far like real professional sport rules go, where it's like they have very specific criteria for like is the foot, like, for instance, in like football, like foot on the line. Like, is it in or out? They have a specific criteria for where it is, like, where's the placement of the knee? It's like they have thought about all of these edge case scenarios, and they have a very specific defined rule for how to do it. Grappling is still a young sport with not a lot of money behind it, with not a lot of, like, professional engagement in it. And so we have a lot of these gray areas where it's like, well, who won? Yeah. And even, like, combat sports and fighting, because it's so heavily commissioned, like run, it's very hard to get rule changes made, and it's very hard to, like, you have a very kind of glacially slow update in your rules process, whereas, like, private sports leagues, like football, baseball, like, they have, like, they can change what they want, because why? The commission gets together, the board gets together, they make these changes, and, like, this is how we're going forward with it.
So I don't know. I think that the rule set is fine. I don't think it's so much better than the others that exist. I think it's another one that does things differently. I think the pit is incredible. I think that was an excellent call. Yes. I like the pit for grappling matches. I don't know how I feel about the scoring. I definitely don't like that we don't have an idea of how these things are being scored. I would really like a rubric of some kind. And honestly, I prefer the traditionals. I think I prefer the traditional scoring methods.
I like ADCC scoring, man.
It keeps things interesting. Yeah. Like I'd like to know who is up during the match instead of these guessing games. Like, it's nice to see that there's points on the board. It's also cool that, like, you can see someone almost get a technique or getting close to that back take, and you're waiting, and you're like, all right, this guy knows that he can win this match if he holds this position for X period of seconds, and you're waiting on the edge of your seat to figure out if he's going to be able to get the position for that. Like, those moments are exciting, and they don't exist in this rule set because there's no, like, does he get points for taking the back? Like, I don't know, how much does that count?
If the sequence I'm watching matters.
Yeah, I never know if anything matters.
And that's kind of makes it really hard from a viewer perspective of, like, okay, this is cool to me if it matters. If it doesn't matter, then I'm just, like, waiting to go to the next sequence that matters. And so it's like, that's something that I think a lot of people don't consider when they Zach and I do a lot of commentary work together. And it's one thing we have to communicate on commentary is, like, why should you care about the sequence that is happening, and how does that sequence tie into the greater context of a match that you're watching or a tournament that you're watching? It's like that context matters, especially for broadcast engagement for your audience. Is like, yeah, oh, he has his foot here. That is really important, because if the foot comes down, then he's going to score. It's like, okay, that matters. Now I really care about that foot.
And I think it's especially important for grappling sports because when you have, like, boxing and MMA, the threat of a knockout is always present. It's always there, and it's something that happens at high levels. It's a regular way to win a match at the best levels in the world.
Yes.
Submission victories are a far lower percentage of professional grappling at high levels than a knockout or submission is in MMA. And I think that lack of the I guess I can't say that for sure, but the threat of it is always less.
Yes, it's really hard to whale a guy into a position to be able to submit him, whereas a knockout at any point in time in the match can just happen.
So every fucking thing matters in MMA because any positional change might lead to that knockout happening. So you're on the edge of your seat.
Yeah.
Submissions are much slower. I think they are probably less frequent than finishes in MMA overall, but maybe that's wrong nowadays. I don't know.
I had a statistics breakdown a couple of years ago that kind of showed between them all, but it only included certain tournaments and that.
Yeah.
Regardless,
it's not
perception is important.
Yeah. And so, I think points help engagement in grappling because the threat of a submission is just not as exciting. It's not as present as knockouts are in other combat sports, which is why, you don't have judges scoring in wrestling the way that not that it's a crazy spectator sport, but, like, it's a lot more interesting to weigh in points and keep me engaged. I can stay engaged better with points. So I dislike that side of the rule set. I like the rounds. I know that you have always been on the fence about rounds. I've always said I think rounds are a great idea for jiu-jitsu. I would actually prefer just solid scoring all the way through, but I like the little breaks and coming back. I think it keeps things interesting. You get fresher athletes after 30 seconds breaks. And like, it's a way to reset things and make it happen again. Like I like the rounds. I think I just might prefer.
The only reason I don't like the rounds, I think I'm trying to think of like, I have less and less good arguments against the rounds the more we do this with a rule set like this.
Yeah.
The only reason I really don't like the rounds is that if you have a grappler that is not going to put on a pace like this, that is unwilling, or your rules have not facilitated them being able to quickly get to a position to start to work towards a submission or a finish, which is the goal in all grappling rule sets. Like, that is the goal. That's how you win. Universally, like, everyone's like, yeah, you should be trying to submit. The rounds reset that for a lot of grapplers that aren't able or are unwilling to, or the rules don't facilitate them keeping a pace that keeps it interesting enough where you are close or moving towards a submission.
Yeah.
And
which is kind of what we see in the finals match of CJI.
Yeah, it's the same thing where it's like, did that need to be 5 rounds? Like, it was interesting for its own respect, but it was like, cool, no one's probably going to submit here.
The only reason that needed to be 5 rounds was to give Kade and Andre Galvao the opportunity to realize how the judges were scoring things after him losing 2 matches and then him still come back and win it.
Yeah.
Like,
which is interesting in its own, for its own reasons, but that match did not push action in the same way that this match did, and I think that is an issue with the rule set. Is like, cool, you need to be able to, if you're going to have the rounds, you have to have an overwhelmingly active. You're gonna give them a break, like they have a minute break. You have a 20% of the match of the time, and you're going to extend this match from normally a high level grappling match is 6 to 8 minutes. ADCC finals are like 10 to 20. Like, those are very different. We have a couple of those every 2 years. Yeah, they can be long. If you're going to run tournament matches like this, it makes the tournaments very, very long.
Sure.
Day 1 ran almost to full time. We were in Vegas time at 1 something in the morning watching this. That's 3 or 4 a.m. East Coast time, which is where we're located out of normally. That's too long. Yeah. These matches can get too long if you don't have defined criteria to keep them going and to work towards submission.
I think it would be fine, but they also could have had more than one mat going at a time. I understand that might have been challenging to do from a logistics side.
I think from a spectator perspective, they only want to have one mat, which is fine for a showcase tournament. I don't
know. I like ADCC because when one boring match is happening, and there were plenty of boring matches in both tournaments this time around, but one boring match is happening, and I'm sitting there in the stands, I can watch the other one that's interesting. Mm-hmm. And instead at CJI, if there was a boring match, I went and got a hot dog.
Yeah.
You know, like it.
Yeah. No, it gives it for big tournaments like this. They're going to run long that are tournaments, pile of tournaments. I like more action going on there because sometimes 2
mats would have been good.
Sometimes it gets crazy. It's just, you're like, this I gotta watch all 3. I'm a little annoyed, but it's
exciting.
I like the sport enough where it's like, cool, I will go and just go find and rewatch the match I missed.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's fun. It's like, because we had a whole group of 10 people from Grappling Rewind and from our team out there. All of us were watching different matches sometimes. Sometimes you go like, what happened? Well, he got him over here. It's okay. And then you pull up Flow Grappling and you tab back and hope it loaded. And then you'd watch the sequence that just happened. And then you'd be back to the match. It made it way more engaging overall as a tournament event than some matches at CGI that were slower or kind of more boring, or that 1 minute break where it's like, cool, I'm just waiting for the round to start now.
I'm good with the 1 minute break. It was the 35 to 40 minute breaks in between matches that were struggles for me. But overall, for a first tournament being that big, I think CGI was an incredible event to be at. I think they made some risks in how they set up their rules that led to some entertaining matches. I think they made one incredibly good choice in the pit. I love the pit. And, you know, I don't think that the rules are bad by any means. I don't want it to come across as like bashing the rules anyway. I think that they're probably on par with every other rule set that we have right now. I don't think that it separates itself as a spectator favored rule set more than anything else. And there's downsides to it and upsides to it. But man, the pit was a good choice.
Yep. So I got nothing else, Zach. It's almost time for our friends to come over and us to play D&D Pretend. Anything fun that happened this week?
Not much. I don't think.
Same thing.
You know, just working,
just hanging out.
Doing.
And then so we'll be back next week with more normal content, more normal breakdowns. But this is a nice opportunity for us to do a one-off show to recap really what is the greatest grappling match that we've ever seen.
I think so.
As always in the show, I'm your host Maine, joined my co-host
Zach,
and we have the Grappling Rewind. So Matt, what it is? Stay safe. If you like the show, please consider sharing it on Facebook with the folks at your gym. It's the best way that we grow the show, and we really appreciate it. You can reach out to us on email.
We also have Instagram. We have Facebook. We have Twitter. We have Google+.
Until that shuts down.
We have a website.
If you have an event you would like to have us cover, please let us know. If you have a name, like most people do, and you'd like to have us stop butchering it,
let us know.
Reach out to us. The show is also available on YouTube, Spotify, in addition to iTunes and every other podcast service. We very much appreciate your time, and thank you.